The Book of the New Sun is written by Gene Wolfe and was published as 4 component books, published yearly from 1980 to 1983. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on this book, and while it's not as engaging of a take, I'm here to tell you that there is nuance to this book. Wolfe is undeniably brilliant in many ways, but there are legitimate reasons as to why this is not everyone's favorite book. Wolfe takes readers into a dying Earth world. It's bleak, and it's reminiscent of the depraved side of the Dark Ages. We're introduced to Severian, who's in the Order of the Seekers for Truth and Penitence, which is just their fancy way of saying the Guild of the Torturers. He's a torturer, but he's also a naive young man, one who's really only known life in the small corner of this small town that he was born into. In an act of love, Severian allows one of the torture victims to take their own life. And it's because of this that he's banished. He's forced to depart on a journey throughout the previously unknown world outside of his simple life beforehand. The journey that follows is a Bildungsroman about Severian as he ventures beyond the guild and attempts to make sense of his new life. He runs into aliens, giants, armies, robots, but in a way the story stays grounded such that it's a lot just about the young man of Severian growing up and making sense of the world around him. The first thing that I want to talk about, and the first thing that you'd notice if you pick up the book, is the prose. It's like reading a book from the 1800s. There are just so many obscure words, and not in the fun, vocabulary expanding type way. It's in like the arcane, antiquated way. Sometimes deciphering the abstruse words is like a puzzle, and it's fun, but a lot of times it more so just feels like it's messing with the flow to me. I will say though that Wolfe kind of teaches you how to read him. I would say by like the 3rd book, I was pretty comfortable with it. He kind of teaches you how to become more comfortable with how his weird vocabulary and flow works. He does this really cool thing where he defines science fiction staples in like a science fiction agnostic way. He describes things like teleportation, ray guns, aliens, ships, etc. like someone who has never heard of them before. Deciphering Wolfe's prose is like when you learn a new language. You don't really understand it for a while, but maybe after a year or so, you start picking up on phrases in books and movies and stuff, and it's incredibly satisfying when you catch the drift. How do you describe the plot of this book? Every scene kind of has like this asterisk next to it. It's kind of because it's all dreamlike. You're not exactly sure what's real or when it's Severian, who's supposed to be an unreliable narrator, when it's him just being unreliable. My favorite explanation of the plot of this series came from the Liminal Spaces YouTube channel. They said something like, it's kind of like a friend who's on a mushroom trip, and you have to sort of decipher everything they say and run it through a filter and see what's real, what are they actually referring to, what are they trying to really explain to you. Nothing exemplifies this weirdness of storytelling than when Wolfe goes on one of his like weird tangent rabbit hole stories. A couple of times per book, he'll just sidetrack and tell you a completely irrelevant, in my eyes, side story or play or seemingly odd tale with random characters and nothing to do with the main story. And that's kind of just Wolfe. If you want to read him, you have to be ready for just being along for the ride sometimes. The world building is beautiful. If you're a fan of the macabre or like Dark Souls-esque art, you'd love this world. The world is depressing and it's desolate. Action and combat are used sparingly, but when Wolfe writes them, he really knows how to write a fighting scene. The book kind of has like 2 ways that it goes about things. One way is when Severian has like a specific task that he wants to get done, or he has a specific place he needs to get to, and the story moves and it's going in a known direction and it's kind of taking you somewhere. And when the book is doing this, I think, is when it's at its best. Outside of these times, though, when he's just like wandering between towns, just thinking and caught up in his own thoughts and musings, it really drags. And if you don't like what he's just thinking about or musing about, too bad, because it's going to be like 10 pages of that. Lots of times the plot devolves into what I would call like a tabletop RPG-esque flow. You encounter random characters or places that show up for one chapter, never to be seen again. Or maybe if they're seen again, many, many chapters or even books down the line. It's like scenes in a play, like a chapter or two will be called like The Waterfall. And in those chapters, Severian will get to a waterfall and he'll experience it in some way and interact with it in some way. And then the next chapter will be titled The Wooden House, and we'll have completely forgotten about the waterfall, and this cycle will just complete with a new object. I honestly found this approach to storytelling quite frustrating. Speaking of characters in the book, let's talk about the characters. Even with my criticism of the ephemeral nature of some characters, they were by far my favorite part of the series. First, let's talk about the side characters. They were not always the most well fleshed out or multidimensional, but they always represented what they were supposed to represent. They're kind of like video game characters where every single one had like a memorable or fun gimmick. Like one guy's green, one guy's a robot, one guy's a giant, etc. There's a core cast of characters that rotate in and out of the plot. Pretty much every single character is introduced in the first book, and then they just kind of come in and out of the books and the story and the plot, which for a really confusing series is extremely welcome to have those familiar faces. Now let's talk about Severian. Severian is probably one of, if not my favorite characters that I've ever read. One of the most complex and interesting. Probably up there with like the main character Alex from A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. To me, this is a coming-of-age story. Severian starts off very naively evil, and he ends the series in quite a different state. This book is all about him wrestling with his identity and his outlook on the world. The main point of the series to me is Severian's tumultuous character development. Because of Severian's naivete and having not learned much about the world when he was really young, we sort of get to see him develop his mature beliefs on war, friendship, love, all in front of our eyes as the story unfolds. It's honestly unexpectedly wholesome at some points. Like, you wouldn't expect a book about torturers to be about finding friends, but like I would consider a lot of book 2 and book 4 about the impact and the meaning of just having a friend. Severian is a vehicle for Wolfe's wisdom, and while I kind of talked down upon Severian's musings in the past in this review, sometimes I did want him to shut up, but often I loved hearing Wolfe's wisdom and reflection on really important, relatable cornerstones of life through Severian's eyes. He gets humanity in its bleakness and its beauty, and he consistently uses Severian's meditations to show this. All right, let's talk about the setup and payoff to this series, which is something often cited when people say that this is like the best science fiction book ever written. If I didn't name all of my YouTube reviews something super robotic, I would probably name it something like The Book of the New Sun reviewed by a moderately intelligent man, because I don't think that I am like the dumbest person, and I don't think that I put less effort into this book than the vast majority of people that read it. I watched YouTube commentaries after I was done with books. I would read reviews after I was done with each of the books. So I think I put a fair amount of effort in, but I did not get vast quantities of this book at all. I know it would be funny to do a review that was just like, yes, I am just a stupid man who does not understand anything about this book, but I don't think that's the case. I think I'm like an average reader, and I don't understand the majority of this book. Maybe it's a book only meant for like the top 5% of most committed and intelligent readers, but for whatever reason, it was a lot of it was lost on me. There is a lot of trust involved. Trust that things will be brought up and explained later. And does Wolfe do good on this promise? Sort of. To me, the payoff was akin to, like, let's say you were celebrating Valentine's Day with your partner, and all you do is at the end of the day, you send them a text that's like, Happy Valentine's Day. Did you celebrate Valentine's Day with them? Yeah, technically. But I'm not sure it's to the expected level of satisfaction. Most things are explained, but the level of fulfillment varies and is up to debate. The last book I read was High Rise by J.G. Ballard, and it's like less than 200 pages. And I think I got a lot more value out of that book than I did this book, which is over 1,000 pages. Now, if I read it again, I think that I would get perhaps exponentially more. But is that a fair way to assess how good a book is? By expecting it to be reread? I don't know. Would the book be better on a second read-through? Yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's fair to judge 2,000 plus pages of reading in a different light. Like, in my opinion, a book or a series better be damn good if they're expecting me to read it and then reread it. I think people don't want to say that a series is bad when they put like 50 hours into reading it. Like, for example, people will play like 2,000 hours of League of Legends, and it'll just be like an average video game to them. And I don't know why we hold books to a different expectation. I think that there's this like gatekeeping sunk cost fallacy in reading that people don't have in other forms of media necessarily, like video games. A lot of people put like 50 hours into a series and they aren't willing to call it bad or call out its negatives. People want to be able to answer yes, in my opinion, if someone asks if it was worth their time. So let me answer this question. Do I think that I would have felt more fulfilled if I had put the like 50 hours that I put into like reading this book into reading like 50 hours of other books instead? I think that's maybe a more fair question. And I think I would, yeah. I think how much you enjoy this book depends a lot on your philosophy of how books are meant to be written. Like, if you think that it's fair for a book to expect extreme scrutiny or even rereads, rather than something with just like a fast-flowing plot. In conclusion, I will never forget this book. In professional basketball, if you want to make like $20 million a season as a role player, you have got to define your role. Are you the big guy that just gets rebounds and can shoot free throws? Are you like a 3-and-D player? Are you the team hothead? Whatever this is, you better know it, or else you are not going to get signed to an NBA roster. If the Book of the New Sun was an NBA role player, it would absolutely succeed. It would get a spot. Because love it or hate it, the Book of the New Sun is absolutely iconic. And Gene Wolfe knows the type of world that he's trying to portray. He writes with a purpose from a big picture all the way down to a sentence-by-sentence level of his prose. His writing is recognizable, and his storytelling follows a distinct theme. My view of this series diminishes, however, because of my belief that the best books have a low barrier to entry while also having a high skill ceiling or complexity level for more advanced reads or rereads. I think that way you can enjoy a book on its first read, but the beauty becomes that much more realized when you get to put more time into analyzing it and reading it. A great example of this, in my opinion, is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I think that the Book of the New Sun has that high complexity for sure, but its barrier of entry is just a little bit too high, in my opinion. My understanding of the series can best be described in a metaphor that I used in, I think, my review of the first book, which is like It is like analyzing an advanced math textbook or reading an advanced math textbook. It doesn't feel like it's exactly written to stimulate immediate pleasure. The book is essentially chunks of lessons and micro stories, and it's written to be reread and analyzed. And the real satisfaction comes when you return to the book and you look back on it and you see how everything fits together. I see the Book of the New Sun like I'm a teacher, and it's like a brilliant yet poorly behaved child in one of my classes. I'm hard on it because I see it has so much potential, not because I just flippantly hate it. I really want it to succeed just so bad. And I just don't know if it did. This is not 4 books. It's one book. I guess I suggest reading the first one, and then if it intrigues you and you like the writing style, you can move forward, but there's also no shame in putting the series down. Is the Book of the New Sun as a whole worth a read? I don't know. But I do know that anyone who says that they know one way or the other is being disingenuous. Thanks for watching.